This is Chapter 13, Policies to Promote Older Adults' Well-Being. The learning objectives for this chapter include: describe the primary federal policies, programs, and regulations intended to benefit older adults, analyze the historical, economic, and political context that has affected age-based policies, list the primary characteristics of Social Security, analyze the benefits and limitations of Medicare and its future, understand how Medicare and Medicaid are the two major insurance systems, and identify limitations of current policies and future directions for long-term services and support. You've likely heard about social policies related to older adults if you've paid attention during any election cycle. Many of these conversations are about the future of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, amidst a seemingly shrinking governmental budget. However, the reason these age-based policies are requiring more of the budget is because we have an increased life expectancy and more adults than ever thanks to the baby boomers. So let's talk about some of these policies. This chart shows how the government budgeted for some of these programs in 2013. You can see that Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid each take up a chunk of the budget, but there are other things such as defense and security that are in the budget as well. To understand how the different policies differ by factors, you can look at this chart. You can see which programs are on the basis of age versus financial need, which programs pay out cash versus cash substitutes, and which ones are funded by paid workers versus Congress. Eligibility criteria for these programs are typically age-based or need-based. Social Security and Medicare are both age-based programs, meaning all older adults are automatically enrolled regardless of financial need or health status, whereas Medicaid is a need-based program where eligibility is decided by financial need. In terms of how they are funded, Social Security and Medicare are contributory, meaning people are entitled to benefits only if they have contributed to the system. Need-based programs may be discretionary, meaning they need to be voted on to be funded each year by Congress. As mentioned, these programs and their funding are a constant part of the political conversation. A lot of the disagreements on these policies are relating to U.S. ideology. Essentially, these debates are rooted in the conflicting beliefs regarding if people should be personally responsible for their own well-being, or if the government or larger community has a responsibility to provide for those in need. Many countries outside the U.S. follow a national collectivist responsibility to care for those in need from cradle to grave. Some groups have formed to argue their side of the debate. The intergenerational inequity perspective believes that government support for older adults is done at the expense of our younger generation. They feel that the money spent on older adults should be used for child welfare and school. In contrast, the interdependence of generations framework believes that younger and older people both support one another during life. They believe that policies aimed at older adults can provide indirect benefits to younger people. Policies have shifted throughout U.S. history based on current beliefs and ideologies. Prior to the 1930s, there were not many social policies aimed at older adults because Americans were not living very long, and the ideologies of the time were that productive members of society were self-sufficient and that your family should provide any care you need in later life. As we started living longer and ideologies shifted, more policies have emerged to support older adults. This includes Social Security, which was implemented after the Great Depression. And you can see here to the right, this is the signing of Social Security. As I mentioned, Social Security was passed in the U.S. in 1935 after the consequences of the Great Depression. When this was developed, only 5% of population were older adults, so nobody could foresee that we would increase life expectancy so dramatically and possibly not have enough funds to support everyone through Social Security. In the 1960s and 70s, increased economic productivity in the U.S. led to the expansion of programs aimed at older adults. Both Medicare and Older Americans Act were passed during this time. The government saw what was called a graying of the federal budget during this time due to the increase of these types of policies. Since the 1980s and 90s, a growing federal deficit put pressure on lawmakers to reduce government spending. Ideology for supporting, based on age, began to decrease as negative feelings towards taxes and wanting to support youth grew. As it became more clear that age was not necessarily a marker of need for governmental support, people began to support needs-based eligibility rather than just age-based eligibility. More policies targeted low-income individuals rather than just age. Since the 2000s, we've seen more people challenging age-based entitlements. There are more conversations about what the role and responsibility of the government should be with regards to older adults' well-being. Things such as the Affordable Care Act were passed, as you can see being signed to the left, that provided support to people in need of all ages. Most of this decade has seen political debates between parties limiting what has actually been achieved regarding changes to social policies aimed at older adults. Now we'll talk through the 4 major programs aimed at older adults: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the Older Americans Act. The main goal of Social Security is to provide income security, or a safety net, for all older adults. Social Security is based on the idea that social adequacy, or the shared societal obligation to provide a basic level of living for all. Remember, Social Security is accessed by over 90% of American workers and is the largest source of income for most older adults. However, Social Security is also based on individual adequacy, which means it is partially based on earned rights. You pay into Social Security through payroll taxes, meaning if you are employed, you are likely paying into Social Security and therefore will be eligible to receive benefits when you are over 60 years old. While Social Security is often seen as something that benefits only older adults, it actually has benefits that can span more than one generation. It is important to note that while we are all paying into Social Security, we are all also eligible to receive benefits. So essentially, you are putting into Social Security in order to make out your money later. You can think of it like you are paying your future self. Additionally, when older adults are supported by Social Security, it allows middle generation adults, usually their children, to use less of their own resources to care for aging family members. And additionally, it can support those of all ages, for example, children being raised by grandparents. Here's a graphic that shows a little bit more about how money flows in and out of Social Security. So just for example, in 2017, $996 billion flowed into Social Security through paid worker taxes, like what you would be paying in if you are currently employed, while $952 billion flowed out as benefits to older adults. So you'll see that less is going out than is going in, but of course, it fluctuates year to year, who's withdrawing, and as we get more baby boomers hitting Social Security, we're going to have more of them pulling out than we've had in the past. So this kind of fluctuates year to year, but you can read a little bit more about how this works on this slide. If you just pause the video. The future of Social Security has been a concern for many years as we see more Americans living longer than ever. Lawmakers have worried about an apocalyptic demography where we cannot sustain age-related benefits due to changes in demographics. There are many concerns about what money will be available in Social Security to future generations. It is important to remember that this is not simply one pot of money that will run out, but rather a pot that is continuously being replenished by younger workers. However, it is true that as we have a lower ratio of younger population to older population, we will see that benefits may shrink. Here you can see in the graph just an estimate of how our older adult population is rapidly growing up through 2050. There are many solutions that are being discussed. One is the privatization of Social Security by requiring employees to contribute to individual savings accounts, such as IRAs, in preparation for their retirement. Other suggestions include raising the age to receive benefits, increasing the payroll taxes going into Social Security, reducing the benefits that are provided, or raising the cap on the amount of one's income that is taxed to go into Social Security. You can read more about these potential solutions in the textbook. Okay, so the Older Americans Act is something that supports the federal budget and how that's spent on health care and other things for older adults. So while only 1% of the federal budget is spent on social services for older adults, these programs are overseen by what's called the Administration on Aging. And so the Older Americans Act was established in 1965 to kind of help manage these programs. Some of the things that the Older Americans Act support include healthcare management. This includes calling doctors, getting information on healthcare. Of course, an important part is transportation to and from these services. In-home services such as nursing care that comes to the home. Senior centers for daily activities. Nutrition programs, you might have heard of Meals on Wheels. Caregiver support, so respite care so that caregivers can get a break from doing their informal caregiving. And then legal assistance. And here's kind of a graphic that has some more examples like preventing and detecting elder abuse, assisting family caregivers with counseling, supporting nutrition programs, as I mentioned, providing community service training, especially like to help older adults re-enter the workforce, or providing home and community services like preventative care or transportation. So they do lots of good stuff. Okay, moving on to Medicare and Medicaid, something that is often confusing to people because they sound very similar. So kind of to just establish quickly the differences, Medicare and Medicaid are the two major insurance options for older adults. Medicare is a universal healthcare option based on age that funds acute and more preventative care, so just regular doctor's visits and things like that. Whereas Medicaid is a universal healthcare based on economic need and has become the primary funder of long-term services and supports. But this is a need-based care. So you have to meet certain eligibility criteria to be able to use this. And you can see in the pie chart that the Medicare and Medicaid make up a big portion of what people are using. You can see some out-of-pocket and some private health insurance there. But Medicare and Medicaid are a large chunk of what people are using. Here's another graphic that shows a little bit more of the differences between these two. So you can pause the video here if you'd like to read a little bit more from this infographic. Okay, so long-term services and supports are an important consideration for older adults because we're living longer. We are living longer with chronic illnesses. This means that there needs to be more support for long-term health care. Approximately 70% of adults aged 65 plus will need long-term services and supports. Often these supports come from informal caregivers like family members, but sometimes older adults need more care, and that's where insurance plays a role. Contrary to what you might think, Medicare does not cover long-term use of nursing homes, and there is low coverage for in-home care because you must meet strict eligibility to use Medicare for those costs. This is unfortunate since in-home care is more affordable than nursing homes, and many older adults would prefer to remain in their homes. To meet the needs of long-term care for chronic illnesses, though, Medicare now offers Part D, which covers some prescription medication costs. Medicaid often fills the gap to provide funds for long-term care for older adults. However, to qualify, one must be low income, and so often older adults spend away their savings and their assets, such as their homes, in order to make themselves qualify for assistance. So essentially, older adults must put themselves into poverty in order to qualify for this. And for those that qualify, it provides funds for in-home care or nursing care. Now, Medicaid has tended to have more support for institutionalized care than in-home care, which is unfortunate given that in-home care is more cost-effective and more desirable to most older adults. Luckily, though, as you can see in this bar chart, Medicaid is growing to incorporate more home and community-based care, which are the green bars. You can see that that percentage of growth is getting larger, and less institutionalized care, which are the purple bars, and those are shrinking. And hopefully this meets the demands of the future adult population that will want to kind of have that aging in place be an option for them. So something that's kind of more new and up and coming is long-term care insurance. And so this is an option to help cover gaps in home and skilled nursing funding. However, it's currently a small market, which makes it expensive and complex to understand for the average person. These insurance plans can help cover the costs for things like assistance with activities of daily living, as we talked about ADLs, home modifications to let you stay in your home safely, nursing home or hospice care. This may become a more popular option people consider moving forward in the future as we see the need for more of this. So programs like Social Security and Medicare benefit older adults, but call into question whether such programs should be age-based or need-based, and additionally, what the role of the government or states should play in these programs. It is important to understand how programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the Older Americans Act assist older adults, including the limitations and benefits that they provide. Medicare is a primary funder for healthcare, but it does not cover the full cost of care or home-based care. And therefore, Medicaid fills in these gaps, but the budgets for these areas are really being cut, and people have to meet strict eligibility criteria in order to receive Medicaid. Finally, long-term care is an important consideration as we live longer with more chronic illnesses. So figuring out how to take care of older adults in the later life for long-term care, using either Medicare, Medicaid, or any other ideas is really important for future research. And as always, make sure you check your textbook for the full information about this chapter.